little bit about me. To introduce myself, I started life as a botanist. I'm originally from Lancashire, and I've always been absolutely mad about plants, botany, wildlife, butterflies, obviously. And so I did a botany degree at Edinburgh University in the very early 80s. And then I briefly worked as a botanist, looking at the effect of clay quarrying on plants. There's a lot of clay in Lancashire, and I was very into looking at clay quarrying. But I couldn't get enough work back then because it was the conservation dark ages and I had a mortgage. So I retrained as an actuary, and I worked in finance for over 30 years, advising pension schemes on economics and mortality rates, which is more interesting than it sounds. But when you do that sort of job, you're in an office for 12 hours a day. And I started to get cabin fever, and I was desperate to get back to looking at butterflies and botany. So in my mid-50s, 5 years ago, I was desperate to get back outdoors, and I retired to focus on plants, on obviously butterflies. At the same time, in 2015, I moved to Richmond in Swaledale from Wetherby, and I've been gradually getting to know the wildlife in this really special dale. I do a transit called Whitcliffe, which is about 2 miles east of Richmond. I'll show you where that is in a minute on a map. It's a really, really special transit. I'm very, very lucky. And thank you to Dave Wainwright for setting it up. It includes a landmark of Willins's Leap, if any of you, I'm sure a lot of you actually are local and will know that. It's where a local man in the 1660s went over with his horse, Mr. Willins. That's why it's called Willins's Leap. He survived, but the horse didn't. It is actually quite tricky. I do try to watch where I walk. When I moved here, I had the impression that the climates and habitats would be too harsh for butterflies. It does look very harsh. My husband describes the climate as brutal, and it really is. It's very, very windswept. Our neighbours said that the wind just never, ever drops, and they've been here 50 years. And so you don't really think butterflies when you look around here, I must admit. And we're quite close to the A66. And when I used to drive across that, I used to think that nothing would ever survive, especially butterflies. It just looks absolutely barren. I mean, when you look at this scene here, this is actually the splash, More Creatures Great and Small, which is an Arkengarth Dale. That's my friend's car going over it. So I'm first going to talk about the geology and the landscape of the dale. Have a look at a few key flowering plants and trees. And then I'm going to go into 3 habitats in more detail and show what butterfly species I've seen there. And do feel free to chip in if you've seen more than me, because I've only been here 5 years, and I know that some of you really know a lot about Swaledale. Finally, depending on how the time is going, I'll focus in on 2 or 3 species that thrive here. I'll just say at this point that I'm an absolutely rubbish photographer. I've got no eye, and so very few of the photos are mine. I'm very lucky that a friend of mine, Moira Barker, took the scenes for me. There's only 1 or 2 that are mine. You'll spot them because they're pretty dreadful, because I took them on my phone just to make a point. I've also used some beautiful butterfly photos from the photo competition. So thank you very much to those photographers whose work I've used. I've credited you, hopefully, but do stick your hand up if I haven't credited you. And thank you for those beautiful photos. So the first thing is, some of you are local and some of you are quite a long way away. So I thought I'd start by saying, where is Swaledale? Well, this is the top of Yorkshire here, and this is the Swale River. I live here, that's Richmond there, which is quite a flat plain by the time it gets to there. This is about 25 miles. It starts here near Keld, which is a very beautiful village, and it runs west to east through Mooker, Reeth and Grinton for about 25 miles. It's a very fast flowing river. If anybody watches the Yorkshire Shepherdess, she lives here. Up here, there. And you'll see from her filming how bleak it is. That's quite near Keld up here. So Swaledale and its offshoot Arkengarth Dale are 2 of the most northerly Yorkshire dales. In fact, I'm pretty sure they are the most northerly Yorkshire dales. And they run west to east across the top of Yorkshire. If you ever take the A66, it's just a little bit south of that. This is Reeth, taken from Harkerside. That's Arkengarth Dale, and this is Swaledale. They form a kind of Y. And you can see the moors around, quite bleak. So I'll now talk about the geology, because the layout of the dale impacts on butterfly species. It's quite unusual. The geology is a limestone base, with the river running really fast through, gouges out very steep sides. And there's plenty of dry stone walls and barns. It was formed by glaciers and shaped by harsh weather conditions since. Underneath the limestone is shale, and the shapes of the hills really depend on how the limestone has eroded down to the shale base. Now, the main features of the limestone are shake holes and swallow holes, which I'll explain in a minute, and inland cliffs, both of which are really good for butterflies. Now, somebody asked me the other day what a shake hole is, and I looked up a proper definition. It's a conical pit dissolved into the limestone over a really long time by slightly acidic rain. Some of them go really, really deep, and then they become caves, which are called swallow holes because they could swallow you. And they vary from a few feet across to several hundred yards. Now, this is a small one. I think it's about 6 foot. It's on my transect, and about 2 foot deep. And a geologist said to me, the most important thing to know about shake holes is you never stand in them, because apparently these bottom can actually be just about an inch thick, and you can go through into a cave. There's loads and loads of caves. So when you're looking for butterflies in them, always stand on the edge. Don't ever stand in them, apparently. Now, the reason why I'm going into this is because these shake holes trap heat on a sunny day. Even on a cold day, they give a little bit of shelter from the wind. And when you're on the really bleak moors, this is where you'll see butterflies. I always go to the shake holes first. And you can get some really, really big ones. But they do also provide somewhere for flowering plants to grow, which then attract butterflies. So like I said, don't go in them, but they are quite good to go and look at. This is an absolutely massive one at Stang Forest. That would comfortably fit my house. That's a total photo taken by me, but I was trying to illustrate how big these things can be. Absolutely massive. Again, there's no way of knowing how deep it will be. But one thing I think they also do is provide a hibernation habitat for peacocks and small tortoiseshells, because the day I went to see this shake hole was probably quite early April. There was loads of peacocks around this area. And I think they've been hibernating in these sort of shake holes and swallow holes, because, and as soon as a warm day, they were straight up and all around the moor. This is a swallow hole. As you can see, the bottom's gone out of it. But again, a really good hibernation habitat and quite warm, probably on a warm day. Now, inland cliffs. This is actually my transect. This is Whitcliffe near Richmond. That's my transect along the top and round to where I'm stood here, and that's the river. This is an amazing spot for butterflies, both at the bottom and at the top. It's public footpaths here and here. It's an old Iron Age fort. And there's loads and loads of different plant species and quite a lot of shelter with the trees. It's very, very steep. The trees kind of disguise that, but the trees also give a lot of shelter. And it's incredibly windy. The wind comes flying right across and up to the top. But the trees just give that little break, and they form, there's lots of little colonies of butterflies. Northern brown argus here. There's a wall colony here. Another wall colony where I stand. Dark green fritillaries over here. This side fly past here. And common blues down here. So there's some really, really good colonies. And I worked out that I think there's about 23 species. I'll go into more detail about species later. You can walk through here and see different species and walk up here and see some more. And there's probably hair streaks. On the Butterfly Atlas, which is always worth a look at, I've been looking at it to see what I could see that I've not seen. And it mentions hair streaks, white letter hair streak and purple hair streak along here. So I've never seen them, but that's my project for the summer, to try and see some. So I've seen about 23 species myself. So if that's 25 species, just in a very, very small area. So it's well worth a visit. There's a public footpath that goes from Richmond right through the woods and comes out here.
Excuse me.
Yeah?
I'm going to unmute Paul Kipling. He would like to ask a question.
Oh, yes. Hang on. Hi, Paul.
Hi. You know, you just mentioned the footpath through the woods.
Yes.
You can find white letter hair streak eggs on most of the elms through the wood. But there's one particular area with 2 or 3 elms. They're there all the time. Very difficult to find the adults, but they are definitely in the woods there. They're really
Oh,
good.
thank you. Oh, I thought you might know, because I know you did. Did you do this translate before me? I'm pretty sure you did, didn't you? Or very similar.
No, but I've lived here a long time.
Yes, I think we're virtually neighbours, actually, or we were at one point, but yes.
Possibly so.
Yes. Oh, thank you very much, Paul. That's great.
Okay.
Anything else? Yes, that's great. So the historic industry of Swaledale was lead mining. And the reason why I mention this is it does have quite a lot of impact on wildlife, even though it's pretty much long gone. There's hundreds and thousands of spots where there are poisonous ore piles, which is called galena. This is Surrender Bridge, where there's a lot of lead mining, and you can see there's piles of ore, and it's been gone almost 200 years, but you don't get much growing in the areas where there's ore piles. So that's a bad thing. But on the positive side, bell pits, which I'll show you a picture of in a minute, are a bit like shake holes. It's ancient mining where they couldn't do mine shafts, so they just did them in a bell shape. And they give nice warm little bits for butterflies, keep out of the wind. And another way lead mining affects wildlife is due to a thing called the Swaledale Exodus, which happened in 1832. Lead prices dropped and all sorts of things happened all at the same time. And 2/3 of the population left in about a year or two. I think it went down from 6,000 people to 2,000 people. And it's built up a bit since then, but it's not a massively populated area. In fact, my ancestors were people who left in 1832, and they went down to Barnsley to become coal miners. So it's a very, very depopulated area. For 25 miles, to have a few thousand people is hardly anything. So the wildlife can pretty much get on with it. There are a lot of walkers, obviously the holiday makers, but a lot of areas are hardly ever walked. There's a lot of things to be found. You know, wildlife is very, very undisturbed. This is a bell pit. This is actually my transect in Deepdale. This bell pit is probably 6 feet from here to here, but because the wind comes from the back of it, it's amazing what butterflies can hover around here, mainly small heaths. And it's incredibly good because it just gives that little bit of windbreak. Although the vegetation doesn't look up too much, but it's just that little bit of break from the wind that makes all the difference on the moors. So the sort of habitats you get, it's quite a varied habitat area, I think. There's the main river swale, which is here, with the very steep sides, like you can see. This is the Kell to Mooka walk, excuse me, with Kell at this end and Mooka at that end. The smaller streams, which we call gills, like this coming down, they are really good because they cut a Y out of the hillside and they give a little bit of shelter for some scrub, some trees, some flowering plants. Again, they keep the wind off the butterflies, which is the main thing. There's a lot of meadows. This is a meadow here. Some of them are ancient, they're very stable with the flora that they have. And quite famous, actually. People come from miles around to see them. Very beautiful. And they provide a lot of flowers for butterflies. So a lot of flowers for butterflies. There's a lot of areas with mixed wood and scrub, like this sort of thing here. Just enough to give a bit of shelter, a few thistles around the edges, a bit of scrub, varied flora for the butterflies, for nectaring and eggs. And then there's the bleak moors with the upland bogs. And it's always surprised me how wet some of these bogs are, because when you look at the side of that hill, it looks pretty dry, but when you get to the top, often it's just really, really wet with upland bogs and sedges. And then there's farmland, if you look at here, which is mainly sheep, but with some cows near Richmond. A lot of sheep, not really much else. Farmland is probably the least productive area for butterflies, I think. This is a meadow, just letting somebody there. This is a meadow in Richmond, looking down over the town. You can see all the beautiful flowers, mainly oxeye daisies, I think there, buttercups. There's quite a few different things there, and clovers. Very, very beautiful meadows. So looking at meadow flora, I'll cover some habitats now and cover some of the flora and then some of the species that you can see, and then some places where you can go to actually see some of these things, some ideas, footpaths you can walk on. The meadow flora is obviously a mixture, but yarrow and ragwort, I think, are two of the most useful plants for butterflies. especially for small coppers. A lot of butterflies like to nectar on them though. I know ragwort's not very popular, especially with farmers because it's poison, but it is a really useful plant for butterflies and moths. Garlic mustard, which does very, very well in Swaledale for orange tips. I think generally in textbooks, it tends to say cuckoo flower is the main plant for orange tip to lay their eggs on and nectar on, but I found that garlic mustard is more popular up here. They don't seem to bother much with the cuckoo flowers. It does very, very well in damp meadows. Then there's violets. These do well in woods, in clearings. Dark green fritillaries lay their eggs on them. Oxeye daisies, which is lots of butterflies nectar on them. Scabious for vanessids and skippers. Skippers actually love scabious. Thistles and hardheads, really anything purple. It doesn't seem to matter what species of thistle or hardhead. Vanessids just love them all and do skippers as well. And grasses for browns and skippers lay their eggs on. All of them have different ideas about which ones they like. For example, Small Heath likes the fescues. Some of them prefer Yorkshire fog. And then dandelions, which bees absolutely love as well. And I think dandelions are very underrated. Lots and lots of butterflies like to nectar on dandelions, and there's always a bit of a war on them from gardeners. But they're really good, cheap and cheerful plant for nectaring. A lot of the whites seem to like them, and the orange tip likes them as well. So the meadow species that I've seen around here, common blue I'm a bit worried about actually, because when I first started looking at the butterflies around here, I knew of several colonies of common blue, and they all seem to be disappearing. It's really awful actually. Last year, I don't think I saw a single one in Swaledale. I saw some somewhere else, but that doesn't really count. Around here, I had 2 colonies on my transect when I started on the top of Williams's Leap, and they've both gone completely. And yet the bird's foot trefoil is still there, which is incredibly odd. I just don't know what's happening with them really. And they're so distinctive, you can't really miss them when they're there. Small coppers are actually conversely doing extremely well. I'll talk about small coppers at the end because they are doing incredibly well here anyway. I don't know about other areas, but they're doing phenomenally well. Browns, Meadow Browns doing well, likes meadows, obviously with its name. Ringlets are often the commonest butterfly you see. They're very prolific. You can see hundreds in a day. Now, I've never seen a gatekeeper in Swaledale, although I understand from the atlas. Paul, have you seen a gatekeeper around here? Paul Kipling?
I saw one at our place about 10 years ago, and that's the only one. But I understand they're regularly seen near Bedale and just south of here, Nosterfield way. So they just haven't reached us yet, but they've been stuck 1 or 2 dales away for 15 years or so. So I don't quite know why they haven't made it.
Yeah.
But they haven't.
No, I've never seen one. Small Heath I'll talk about later because they're doing phenomenally well as well. They really are taking off here. The whites, Brimstones are doing incredibly well at the moment. When I first moved here, I didn't see one for 2 years, and then I saw one and I was very excited. And now they're quite common. Even my husband, who doesn't know anything, spots them flying past. They're really moving into Swaledale in a big way. They don't settle very much, but they fly past a lot. Orange tip are doing incredibly well, as are the main whites. And the skippers are doing incredibly well, the large skipper and the small skipper. They do very well on meadows. The vanessids, the small tortoiseshell is doing well, and the peacock. Commas, they're okay. You don't see that many. Painted lady depends on what year it is, of course, whether it's a painted lady year or not. I think I saw one last year. Red Admiral, beautiful photo here by Martin Partridge. And dark green fritillaries. They do well. They like the thistles, they like their purple plants, and they do settle in meadows to nectar sometimes. But what I want to show here is a roadside mini meadow. This is the best spot, I think, in Swaledale for looking at butterflies. This is Hergill Road, coming out of Richmond. And it's absolutely amazing. It is the absolute. It doesn't look much, but this is the absolute best spot if you want to see butterflies on a summer's day. This little road verge here, which is about 6 foot deep, you can literally see 200 or 300 butterflies on a nice day. And I get absolutely incensed when people park on it. It drives me mad. I have to bite my tongue as I walk past when I see a 4-wheel drive plonked on these butterflies. It's this side of the road. It's mainly small skippers, a lot of ringlets, some whites, dark green fritillaries, not too many, but some. Large skippers, if it's the right time of year, only singles, but large skippers, small tortoiseshells, everything on this side of the road, orange tips. It's absolutely amazing. It's packed with butterflies. And you can just stand in one spot. If you stand about here, you can just literally sometimes see 100 butterflies. It's absolutely amazing. And it looks like nothing when you look at it. And you have to get your eye in, because quite often the weather's not perfect. They're all down in the grass. But if you stand there for any length of time, you eventually start to realize you're looking at hundreds of butterflies. It's really quite special. And so this is about 2 miles out of Richmond on Hergill Road. There's actually parking, proper parking here and a bit further up, so you don't have to park on top of the butterflies. The funny thing is, it's this side of the road. This side of the road only has really small tortoiseshells and peacocks. It's very odd. The skippers don't cross the road. They're very, very local, and they tend to stay in one spot. But this is definitely the best spot you'll ever find for seeing things in Swaledale. Just to show you some lovely pictures here, Michelle Smart and Peter Wharton, I think it is. Small skippers, beautiful picture, and large skippers. Lovely, you can see both of those in the place I've just highlighted. Now, some meadows to visit. There's some very beautiful meadows. This is a photo by my friend Eileen Jenkins of Mooker Meadows, taken once, it's probably a May time, with all the beautiful flowers, the clover, the daisies. And that's Mooker Meadows, really, really beautiful, a lot of butterflies. But other good places are Westfield in Richmond, which is the fields that go down from a lane called Westfield. It's common land, you can walk anywhere you want, and there are a lot of butterflies. It's very, very beautiful. Same Roundhouse in Richmond. This is just off the Reith Road. You can park there and you can walk across the bridge into a beautiful meadow. And again, especially on a summer's evening, about 5 o'clock, you will see loads and loads of beautiful butterflies, mainly skippers, ringlets, meadow browns, lots of things, well worth a walk in summer. And the riverside walk between Keld and Mooker, again, that's really lovely. It's a bit more windswept, so perhaps a few less butterflies, but a beautiful walk and plenty of plants and butterflies to have a look at. Now I'm going to talk a bit about inland cliffs. This is Deepdale near Richmond. There's the river again. And if you look at this cliff, it looks very, very barren. This is on my transect again, looking out over Hudswell and the Army land here. It looks very barren, but these cliffs are really amazing because there's lots and lots of nooks and crannies. So the wind comes from this direction, but with all the nooks and crannies and bits of scrub, there's actually a surprising amount of shelter. You don't get many butterflies on bits like this, but if you look in these little bits, you definitely do, and especially as you go a little bit further down. So there's actually, and also with the calcareous soil, you get a lot of quite interesting plant species. For example, this is a bit, so I took this picture, that's why it's not very good, but this is a crevice in it. And Dave Wainwright told me that there's plenty of northern brown argus in this crevice. I've never seen any, I've visited it quite a lot, so maybe they've gone, but there did used to be northern brown argus. This is like a cutting into the cliff. There's lots of places for butterflies to hibernate or shelter. So even though it's windswept, it's not as windswept as it looks in places. So the flora, quite varied. There's the trees, the elms, the ash, the oak, the sycamores as well. Lots of varied trees, deciduous, there's no coniferous bits. And a lot of rock rose. If I just go back a slide, just 2 slides. These cliffs are covered in rock rose, especially around this corner in about May. You can see it all flowering. And the cliffs are actually covered in rock rose. But the weird thing is, there's only 1 or 2 a year that I see of northern brown argus. And I can't quite understand. There's obviously a limiting factor, which isn't the rock rose. There's obviously something to do perhaps with parasites, or its life cycle if it's attended by ants or something. There's just something a bit odd about why it's not spreading out and why you get this tiny, tiny colony on this great big cliff that's covered with its food plant. It's very, very odd. I can't really understand it. But anyway, there's beautiful rock rose to be seen in spring. A lot of yarrow, which is a scrubby plant really, but it's very favoured by small coppers. And you don't get many small coppers on the inland cliff, you just get odd ones in singles. And a lot of ragwort again, especially in the sheltered bits, which is really good. Violets, they're more tucked away in the woods. Lots of grasses, different grasses for the browns and skippers. And bird's foot trefoil, again, was I was saying, you just don't see the common blues anymore. I don't know what's happened to them, but there did used to be a couple of colonies, now they seem to have gone. But there are massive patches of thistles and hardheads, and they get absolutely covered with peacocks, commers, small tortoiseshells, and the occasional dark green fritillary in about July and August. Lots, more than you think, really. Huge patches of ivy and holly, but some of these cliffs I think are a little bit too high for holly blues. I've only seen one or two. In theory, there should be quite a lot because I get a lot in my garden, but I think if you go up the cliffs, it's just that little bit too high and windswept for them. I don't think they're quite as hardy as some of the other butterflies. And a lot of brambles. I think brambles are very, very understated because they provide nectar for an awful lot of butterflies, especially speckled woods. And I haven't seen any this year. It's been a really weird year with the weather. Last year, in fact, every year, speckled woods are the first butterflies I see in spring and the last ones I see in autumn. And I haven't seen a single one this year, not anywhere. So I don't know what's happening. I think other people may have seen them, but I haven't. So they're very, very late if they're coming out at all. This is a beautiful photo of a holly blue by C.M. Cox, absolutely gorgeous. So the inland cliff species, common blue, like I said, not seen for the last 2 years. Hopefully it's coming back. Holly blue once. Small copper singles only. Northern brown argus just in singles. And sometimes I think they've actually gone for good and then I see one and get very excited. And then, you know, they just seem to disappear again. Brown argus I haven't seen. Now I do looking at the atlas. Have you seen it, Paul? Have you seen them? What?
Yeah, I've got a few in my garden that I didn't introduce. They got here naturally. But it's very close to the northern brown argus, but they are definitely brown argus. But we're on the tip of the inland north. I think they're quite common further east, but not here.
Yes, I've had one in my garden just once, but only once. Yes, and then there's the hair streaks, which I haven't seen, but Paul said are available in the woods.
Yeah. Come see purple hair streaks at our house if you want. At the right
we'll do
time
that.
of year.
I'd love to, thank you. That'd be great. Fantastic. Yes, I've never even seen one in the whole.
Everybody can as well. That's fine. Just give us a ring.
A general party for see purple hair streak.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. And the whites, you don't really see that many whites on the inland cliffs. You do see some, but again, I think it's a little bit high. Although I have noticed that green vein whites are taking over from in 2015 when I started, I hardly saw any green vein whites. It was small whites. And I think the green vein whites are making a bit of a push to take over the cliffs. You see an awful lot more of them now. And I was quite excited the first time I saw one, and now they're just everywhere. I think they're doing very well. Even in my garden, they're taking over the small whites. You don't see so many small whites as you did. And small skippers, there are some small skippers, but on the cliffs, not a huge number, just in little local patches. The Vanessids do very well on these cliffs because there's lots of brambles, there's lots of thistles, lots of purple patches of plants really for them to feed on. The small-tailed shell does incredibly well. The peacock really loves it, virtually all year round, and there's been quite a lot recently, and then the next brood will come out. And you can sometimes see 30 peacocks in one very small windswept spot, so they're pretty hardy. I don't see many commas. I think it's a little bit too high for them, but you do see some. Painted lady, well, obviously there was a painted lady summer a year or so ago, but last year not too many, but they do like thistles when they're there. And red admirals. And when I was out doing my transect one day, an old guy came up to me and said to me that there was a red admiral colony in some woods near the top of the cliffs, and which is a bit odd because they don't really overwinter here particularly. But anyway, he was absolutely adamant that if I went into these particular woods sometime, there would be this colony of red admirals, which I found very bizarre. But anyway, I've never seen it, so I'll take his word for it, but I don't really quite believe it, if I'm honest. But there are quite a few, and the interesting thing about red admirals is they take up a spot, and you see the red admirals in the same spot every year, usually on brambles, and just one or two. They just seem to take up a spot where they can watch what's happening. A lot of dark green fritillary flybys. They're incredibly strong flyers, and they actually live in a colony, a secret colony. It's on private land at the bottom of the cliff, right on some violets. It's a farmer guards them with his life. So I know where they are, but I don't tell anybody. And they fly up the side of the cliff, and they're so bright and orange that it's like seeing an orange penny flying towards you, and they swoop up the side of the cliffs and then nectar on a thistle and swoop back down again. And you don't see a lot of them, but enough so that you do see some. And the colony's doing well, I think. The browns, the Meadow Browns is doing extremely well. I've heard that it's in difficulties in other places, but you do see an awful lot of Meadow Browns around here. Ringlets are doing extremely well. And so are walls, actually. Along my transect, there's 2 colonies of walls, very discrete colonies, about a mile apart. And it's quite interesting that you don't see hundreds of them, you only see 1 or 2, but they are very persistently successful on these 2 colonies. And they land on a very bare path and sunbathe. And you quite often don't see them because they're camouflaged. And just as you walk towards them, they fly up in your face. And you think, oh, I could have got a photo there. But if you're not looking, you'd have tread on them. The speckled wood, like I said, I haven't seen any this year. Which is really odd. And I'm a bit worried about those. And the small heath, there's 2 very, very successful colonies. I'm going to talk about them a bit more at the end. They're doing incredibly well. They're just, to say that the land looks pretty barren, they are doing phenomenally well at the moment. Very pretty little butterfly. So some inland cliffs to visit. Telfit Bowl near Mask. If you haven't been there, that is a beautiful walk. It's literally what it says, a bowl in the limestone cliffs with a farm at the end. You have to ignore the white cows, they seem fairly safe most of the time. It's a beautiful walk in the evening, especially when the sun sets on it. A lot of butterflies to be seen in the woods. It's very, very pretty. It's a lovely spot. Harkerside and Reeth. There's a lot of green hair streaks there on Bilberry, near the old mines. And it's a nice walk anyway, Harkerside. A bit of a climb, but a beautiful walk. Framington Edge, Reeth, a really phenomenal cliff. You've got to be quite fit to get up it, but there are butterflies about halfway up as well. You don't have to go right to the top. In fact, at the top, there probably isn't very much to see. Whitcliffe, where I've just shown you the photos, that's always worth a walk. At the bottom or the top, you can walk from Richmond, which is a couple of miles, and walk through the woods from Whitcliffe. Absolutely stunning, and a lot of butterfly species. Quite sheltered, despite the wind, the sheltered spots. Beautiful picture of a wall here by Chris Weston. Lovely picture. Right, I'm going to talk a bit about moors and upland bogs. If you look at this picture, I bet you don't immediately think of butterflies. I mean, this picture I think was taken in winter. You can see a bit of frost. But to be honest, it doesn't look an awful lot different in summer. These moors look the same all year round. And yet, surprisingly, there are a lot of butterflies. If you look at this, it just looks barren. And it does feel quite barren and quite windswept when you're up there. But if you look closely, there's lots of little sheltered bits here and here, little dips and gills and grass. There's quite a lot of shelter around. But the wind there will just be 100 miles an hour sometimes, phenomenally straight across, absolutely freezing. So it's what I think I've learned from going to these places is how hardy butterflies actually are. You tend to think of them as fragile little things, but actually they are really, really tough. They have to be to live in these environments. This small skipper here, I took a picture right on the top of the moors. It was cowering from the wind on the side of a thistle. The poor little thing was just ducked down, trying to get a bit of shelter, and just saw it as I walked past. And it wasn't moving for anybody because it was going to get swept away by the wind. The moorland flora can look quite bleak and quite sparse, but it is there if you look around and if you focus in on what species you're looking for. There is quite a lot. There's the yarrow and the ragwort again. Small coppers do quite well up there. Violets if there's a bit of tree cover, perhaps in the lower areas rather than the higher areas. Mainly grasses. There's a lot of very sparse, tough grass up on the moors, which the browns and skippers are okay with, in different species. The grasses are the main species, I would say. Sedges, these are really important for shelter because they're tough, and the butterflies can get down into the tufts of sedges, and actually it gives them a pretty good shelter. And if you go on a windy day, sometimes you can look into sedges and there can be quite a few butterflies cowering in there. You have to get your eye in really to see them, but there are, if it's been sunny quite often, and then it comes sort of maybe a bit colder, they all drop down quite suddenly. And there are quite a few, sometimes carrying a lump of sedges. The thistles, sorry, Paul, will you ask, you put your hand up? No. The thistles and hardheads, they do very, very well on the moors. They're very, very hardy, opportunist species. And you don't get clumps of thistles, but you get quite a lot of thistles spread out, and it doesn't matter what species they are. There's quite a few different species of thistles in Swaledale, but they're all useful to butterflies, the hard heads of thistles. And they look a bit sad and a bit kind of beaten down by the wind, but it doesn't seem to matter. They still support quite a lot of species. And bilberry. Bilberry is really important, obviously, for the green hair streak. Bilberry needs a few trees around it. It's not very good on open moorland, but if it's got a bit of shelter, it can actually support green hair streaks, quite big colonies. And bilberry, there's quite a lot of bilberry around Grinton up on the moors near the old mine. Paul, you say something? I wasn't sure if you were saying something.
Sorry, yeah. I don't know whether you're going to come straight onto it now, but the small coppers use sheep sorrel as a food plant. And around Grinton or in Swaledale, around with the bilberry and the heathers, there's actually an enormous amount of sheep sorrel, and it's tiny, but that's what they use. And there's some massive small copper colonies using that as a food plant. You might be about to say that, but sorry.
No, it's interesting to know. No, it's right, because you're right, because I was going to say something about small coppers are doing incredibly well. They really are doing well, aren't they, at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And the green hair streaks are doing very well as well. They are quite tough little butterflies, despite looking very fragile. So the species, there's just small coppers are doing incredibly well. I'm going to talk a bit about that at the end, because they are really, I'm thinking of them as a butterfly of Swaledale, really, the way they're taking over, doing incredibly well. Common blues actually are tougher than they look. And you do sometimes see them sort of half moorland, but again, not as much as you used to do. I have seen some flying against the wind and been quite surprised, but not recently. Northern brown argus can be quite hardy, and some of the spots that they pick sometimes are incredibly windswept. Brown argus perhaps not quite so much, seem to be more lowland around here, but there are some. Green hair streaks are just phenomenal. You can get hundreds in a colony if there's a decent amount of bilberry. They really are doing well. Most of them on private land, unfortunately, but there are a lot around Grinton where you can walk. You can walk up to the old mine if you're careful. A lot of holes in the ground. The whites, not so much really. You do get the odd white, but they're not really a moorland butterfly. Of the best of them is the green vein white. You do get a few of those, but the whites really are beaten back by the wind, I think. Small skippers love the moors. absolutely loads of them. And you can get really quite big colonies. They're very tough. They drop down very quickly if the wind starts up. They're little survivors, really. You can get quite a few hundred on a moor quite easily. Small tortoiseshells, you can find quite a few of those actually up on the moors, which is surprising, as long as there's some thistles for them to nectar on. Peacocks do incredibly well. When I was at Stang Forest the day, they were everywhere. You know, it wasn't a particularly warm day, it was quite windy, but the peacocks were, there was quite a few peacocks everywhere we went, obviously overwintering specimens. And dark grey fritillaries actually don't seem to mind a very exposed habitat, because they're very strong flyers, they seem to do pretty well. But I'd say that most moorland species are brown. When you're up there, most things that you see will be brown. Lots of ringlets, some walls, but not too many really. Meadow Browns, quite hardy, and small heaths. And I've counted, I might have undercounted, but I've counted 16 species in an extremely harsh environment where, you know, you don't get much of anything really, but you get 16 species of butterfly, you know, really in a harsh place, which I think is pretty good. And you get some good numbers of them as well. It's not just odd ones. You do get a lot of butterflies. So, you know, it's quite surprising, really. The first time I walked on the moors years ago, and I thought there'd be nothing here. There was moths, there was all sorts flapping up, and I was thinking, oh, actually, these moors support a lot of wildlife. This is just an example of a typical moorland bell pit. This is at Deepdale near Richmond. Again, this is my transect. This little bell pit, which are probably 6 feet across and not even that deep, support all these species. A small heath mainly. There's a big small heath colony here. Lots of small skippers, ringlets, tortoiseshells are just here on some thistles. Painted ladies, peacocks, whites. There's a common blue colony here, which seems to have gone. Small coppers just in 1s and 2s, and dark green fritillaries breed here and fly across here. So that's one little bell pit, which doesn't really look particularly exciting. You don't see many flowers there. It does support or shelter an awful lot of species. It's quite high up. So here's some moorlands to visit. Round Reeth, there's loads of different moors. You can go virtually any direction and be on a moor. And you can go Grinton Way, you can go up Park and Garthdale, loads and loads of moors and loads of footpaths. Lots of places to have a look. There's Kiston Hill near Keld, which nearly killed me when I tried to climb it. Well, I did climb it, but it nearly killed me. It's a very, very steep walk up, but worth it. And again, a lot of moorland butterflies. And Stang Forest moors. Stang Forest is a circular wood, but all around it is moorland, and it's lots of footpaths, public footpaths, and it's well worth a walk if you haven't been. Lots to see, lots of butterflies, a lot of peacocks, like I said, and there'll be small skippers and things in summer. Really lovely. So I've counted 27 species and counting, but I'm thinking that there must be more, maybe more species, more colonies. And the good thing is there's plenty to look at. If you're interested, there's plenty of new habitats to find, there's plenty of colonies, lots to record. I mean, I look at things, but I can't possibly look at all of it. And you know, loads of people look as well. But there's loads and loads of areas with footpaths on that just nobody ever seems to go. So lots and lots of things to see. Possible future species, possibly coming soon. Silver wash fritillary and Essex skipper. So that's 2 more species to look out for as well, coming north. So who knows if they'll arrive. So before I go on to individual species, Swaledale summary, there's a variety of habitats with really good sheltered spots. So that's a plus point. Lots and lots of different habitats, different plants, different bits of shelter, lots of places to go. Very sparsely populated, so you can go off the beaten track very quickly and look at wildlife that probably nobody's ever disturbed. So lots of things to see and things to find. But the downside is it's incredibly bleak weather, especially at the moment, a very short summer, and you know, the days when you can actually go out and see butterflies are quite few and far between, especially at the moment. But on the other hand, there's a lot to see if you can cram it all in. So now I'm going to talk about the small copper, because this is a real Swaledale success, the small copper. Whenever I've read books about the small copper or seen them in the past, people always talk about colonies being no more than 12, and you'll never see a big colony of small coppers. Well, up in Swaledale, there are massive colonies of small coppers. I'm talking 100 butterflies plus, absolutely massive. Unfortunately, nearly all on private land, but there are some absolutely huge colonies. And this beautiful photo by Emma Walters of a small copper. This is on the roadside near Grinton, actually, so this is public. There was a stand of ragwort, and I think I counted 80 small coppers last September. Absolutely beautiful. There's 4, I think, here, plus the cinnabar moth caterpillar. This is just one plant, and it was a beautiful sight. Just on the roadside, loads and loads of small coppers, all just flying about, going between ragwort plants. And I've heard other people report similar things as well. And I think that there must be loads of these big colonies where the conditions are right, because this was just a bit off the wall, really, just a few ragwort plants. So it'd be quite interesting if people are interested to keep an eye out for these massive colonies. And I'm thinking that there must be one behind the CB Inn, the Charles Bathurst Inn in Arkengarthdale, because when you're up there, you do see quite a lot of small coppers coming towards you. And I've never had time when I've been up there to look at it properly and try and track them to a sort of mother lode. But I think that there's probably going to be loads more of these huge colonies, especially with the September brood rather than earlier broods in the year. So if you've got time in September and you see a small copper, track it back to its friends and see if there's any more great big colonies. So I think there must be loads and loads of them. And the other thing I wanted to say about small coppers in Yorkshire is, apologies for this blurred photo, but I wanted to show you the blue spots here and here. The butterflies of the small coppers in Swaledale seem to be of the normal variety, and also about half of them of an aberration called Corelio punctata, which I might not pronounce properly, which means blue spots. These are the blue spots. And if I just go back to this photo, you'll see there are tiny blue spots, but not very much. And the reason I wanted to say that is, anecdotally, what I've noticed is the colonies, these very big colonies, split into 2. There might only be a yard between them, but one half will have the blue spots and the other half will not have the blue spots. And they seem to only be bothering with friends which have either the blue spots or not, as if they don't interbreed. And that's only my observation, but it's a very weird sight when you have 2 colonies, 50 one side and 50 the other side, not intermingling. And they're all with blue spots on one side and without blue spots on the other side. So I'm kind of wondering if the ones with the blue spots smell differently or they act differently, or I don't know, there must be some difference that they can see. So that's another interesting thing to watch out for. If you do see small coppers in Swaledale, just have a look to see if they've got these bright blue spots, if they're the aberration. There's lots and lots of aberrations of small coppers, but this seems to be the only one locally with the blue spots. And now I'll just say a few words about the small heath. Beautiful photo here by Mike Smethurst, absolutely gorgeous. You can see all the scales, it's lovely. Small heaths are turning into a real success story around here, a bit like the small copper. When I first started doing my translate, the first year I saw 19 small heaths. I ran off the figures today. Last year, even despite lockdown, I saw 201 in the same spot. And they are starting to form 2 very big colonies. And again, I've read that you only ever see them in singles, but now you're starting to see them in quite big groups of 20, say. And they do seem to fight with each other all the time. You just see them rolling and rolling around your feet because they don't go up very high. Quite big groups of them, really. And you have to look quite hard to count them, but doing extremely well. And the spot where they are, one of the colonies, is here. This is Williams's Leap. That's a memorial for his horse when he didn't go over. This bit of grass here, which looks like nothing, is where there's a massive colony of small heath. And I think there's several generations because they seem to be continuous from about June to about September. And you walk down this path and you can just see massive numbers of small heaths there. It's quite a sight, actually. Lots and lots of them. And yet, if you look at the ground, there's nothing really to see. There's hardly any grass there. They like very fine grasses, which are just as well, but they seem to be just up in here. You can see them all in the air, just here. This is just off Hurgle Road in Richmond. So they're doing incredibly well. There's another colony further along. So keep an eye out for small heaths if you're walking around here, and just see if we see some more big colonies. And finally, I'll just talk a little bit about the orange tip. This was my favourite photos by C.N. Cox. Absolutely beautiful photo of a male. Absolutely lovely. Orange tips are doing incredibly well. And we've all had this awful weather, and yet the orange tips have been flying. You know, everywhere you look, there's orange tips. Virtually the only butterfly at the moment which is still on the wing. And they just seem to be flapping away no matter what's happening to them. I've had loads in the garden this afternoon, and yet other butterflies are lying low or dead or wherever they happen to be. Even though it's just been raining or windy, there's always orange tips. And people keep coming up to me and asking me what these butterflies are with the orange tips, or pink tips, as somebody asked me the other day, which I thought was a bit odd. But they seem to be doing really, really well generally, but also doing particularly well around here at the moment. They must be quite impervious to weather. This is just a larva, a pupa that I had in my garden. That's the day before it hatched, and that was the day last May when it actually became a chrysalis. That was its first day as a chrysalis, and that was its last day, but sort of probably 9 or 10 months apart. That hatched, I think, 21st of April. I presume it's hatched anyway. It's gone. So just thought I'd show you that because I'm quite proud of that. So to conclude, there's many, many colonies to be found. It's a massive area, very unpopulated, lots to be seen, lots to be found. You know, no matter how many of us go out and look for things, there'll still be more to be seen, lots to discover, possibly more species in future. Please do add to the sightings page if you see things that you like or see things that you recognise and you know the name. Please put them on the sightings page so we all know where they are. Fantastic sharing of information now. It's really good, and it's been really useful for me to see what other people have seen. So please do add to the sightings page on the website. And do look at the Butterfly Atlas for Ideas. That's got all the past sightings on it with grid references and maps. So it's incredibly useful, and you can access that from the website. So that's all I wanted to say about Swaledale now. On to questions, and thank you for listening. So Nick, have you got questions? Unmute. You're muted, Nick.
I beg your pardon.
Right,
Yes, there's a question from Jackie Molyneux. Would you be able to do a guided walk of your transect sometime?
I would love to, yes.
Very interested to join.
Yes, of course I could. Yeah, you have to be probably something like July when you see most things on the wing. Yes, of course I'd love to. I'll send a date out. Oh, yes.
That's it for questions.
All right, some more questions. Oh, thank you. That's actually the right time. We've just about finished. So you're all very quiet. So thank you very much for listening to me.
Catherine?
Yes?
I'd like to sort of talk to you about what we've got going on around here, because you'd be quite surprised, I think. So I need to contact you at some stage and have a chat, I think.
That's really good, because I'm not sure where you are, because are you in Richmond?
Halfway to Brompton-on-Swale.
Right, okay, yes, that's a little bit further east, isn't it? So
yeah, it's sort
a bit more lowland.
Neck
yeah.
of Swaledale.
Yes, I'd love to. I'll contact you separately. That's great, thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
I would like to thank our people from far and wide. We have Anne from Toronto. Thank you very much for attending. We've got Tracy from Midwest USA.
Wow.
Thank you very much for attending. She's been asking questions throughout the talk.
Oh, lovely. Yeah, thank you very much for coming and listening to from such a long distance away.
There's only one thing to add at the end. You talked about silver washed fritillary. We had a female silver wash fritillary in the garden 2019, I think it was. So magic to see it.
So it's
But
here then,
amazing.
really. That's fantastic.
Female on the buddleia. There you go.
Fantastic. Yes, buddleia, I think, is the all-time best thing to have for butterflies. I've got 5 in my garden. They just get plastered with butterflies, and they draw in butterflies from different areas. You can actually see things that you perhaps wouldn't see. So, like a magic plant, really. Yes. Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody. I think I'm just finished bang on time, so it's now 8:30. So thank you very much for zoning in on actually quite a nice evening for once.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Thank you. And I'll contact you, Paul, separately. Thank you.
Yeah, good.
No. So, right, thanks very much, everybody, and have a good evening for the rest of the evening. That's it. I'll stop my sharing of my screen.
Stop the recording.
Right.